Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or a personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Jane Elliott. Jane is a globally recognized anti-racism educator, activist, and one of the most fearless truth tellers of our time. For over 5 decades, she's dedicated her life to exposing the realities of racism, privilege, and systemic oppression. She is best known for her groundbreaking Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes classroom demonstration, an exercise in empathy that forced students to experience discrimination firsthand, a demonstration that would forever change the conversation on race and bias in America. Which started in a small classroom in Iowa became one of the most unforgettable and controversial demonstrations of prejudice ever conducted, earning Jane both praise and condemnation. Her work has reached presidents, scholars, activists, and even everyday people who have been both challenged and changed by her teachings. She has spoken on Oprah, Red Table Talk, national news platforms, and stages across the world, relentlessly pushing people to confront the racism embedded in society and within themselves. She has faced backlash, resistance, and even threats, yet never once has she backed down. Whether standing in front of a classroom, calling out privilege in corporate boardrooms, or challenging systemic racism head on, Jane has been unrelenting in her mission for racial justice. She refuses to soften the truth, and in doing so, she has made people uncomfortable, made them think, and above all, she has opened their eyes and made them see. Jane's work has earned her numerous accolades, but beyond the awards and recognition, her greatest impact is the lives of those who have sat in her classrooms, attended her lectures, and have walked away not just informed, but transformed. So, Cousin Jane, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you for calling me cousin. Thank you for admitting that we're all 30th to 50th cousins, because there's only one race and there's only one color group, and that's shades of brown.
I'm sure we'll get into that much more. And also, I gave a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about how you got to who and where you are today, please?
Oh, well, I was born in poverty on 160 acres of land that was not very, the topsoil wasn't very deep. But my father was deep. He was brilliant. He never went to college. He went to high school. His girlfriend, who wasn't his girlfriend, got pregnant, probably by his brother-in-law. And he married her because that's what his father said. You screwed her, you marry her. So he did. And he produced 7 children with her, lost his favorite one. And we got through that over the years, and we got out of poverty. We worked our way out of poverty, worked hard to get out of poverty. We made it finally. I can remember the day we were sitting around the table when we were teenagers talking about what we were going to do with our lives. And my dad came in and he was listening to it. He said, "You can either make a difference or make a dollar. Now decide what you're going to do and get busy and do it, damn it." And he walked into the other room. And I thought, a difference or a dollar? Well, my 3 brothers, one became a dairy plant operator. The other 2 became civil engineers. My 2 sisters and I that were still living became teachers. My brothers made a lot of dollars. My sisters and I made a lot of differences. Mm-hmm. I think making a difference is more important for me. Making a difference was more important than making a dollar. And it's a good thing it was, because teachers don't get well paid. We are paid according to what people think about education. And if that's the way we're being paid, they don't really appreciate education. They'll agree with teachers, but not with educators. I'm an educator. And the word educator comes from the root duck deuce, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is leading people out of ignorance. And you can't do that if you're still teaching that Columbus discovered America. And you can't do that if you're teaching that Native Americans were red. And you can't do that if you're teaching that they were Native Americans. They came from Africa just like all the rest of us did. But you see, we are encouraged to maintain our self-imposed ignorance for as long as we possibly can, because we don't upset people in our society, as long as we continue to perpetuate the myth of whiteness and blackness and redness and yellowness. Those colors in human beings do not exist. Now, I'm going to say that over and over and over, and you're going to get tired of hearing it. But you have to remember, my husband had a retail store, and he knew that people would not buy what he was selling unless they saw it advertised at least 4 times. Now, my daughter said, Mom, that's right, wrong. It's 7 times. All right, well, you're going to hear those same things at least 4 times, because I want people to realize that we are all members of the same race. We're all members of the same color group, and our bodies are the color, our skin is the color it is because we all came originally from a country on the continent of Africa. It's time to get that into kids' heads. It's time to get that into adult heads. It's time to stop this nonsense and this racism nonsense. And we could, if we educators truly led people out of ignorance.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and so honored that you agreed to do it with me. I've been looking forward to this conversation so much because there are not many people who push the status quo and as unapologetically as you have. You've spent over 5.
But you see, you know, and I know that the reason I can do this is because of the color of my skin. I can say whatever I damn please, particularly now that I'm old, because number one, I'm white, so I must be right. And that is ridiculous. You have forgotten more since breakfast about racism than I will ever learn. You know that, and I know that. What I have learned about racism, I learned after I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise in my classroom the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Because it got on television and got a bunch of publicity, people called me and asked me to do the exercise with people in corporations. And I started doing that with adults. I learned more the first time I did that exercise with adults than I had ever learned before in my life. And you knew before I was born, no, you didn't, you aren't my age. You knew before you were born what I don't know, because you had to know. In utero, you had to learn things that I never had to learn until I was over 40 years old. But once I realized how really ugly this is and how really determined we pale faces are to maintain our superiority based on the lack of a chemical in our skin and how ignorant that is, I decided that never again would I tolerate racist remarks from anybody being made in my presence. So, yeah, I have made a difference in a lot of people, but a whole lot of people think that I'm making a negative difference because they want to think that they're white. And young so-called black males want to think that they're black. That is their self-image. They aren't. It's time for us to get over the idea of whiteness and blackness. If you don't know where it came from, do you want to know?
Sure.
Okay, a man named Torquemada, who was a vicar in the Catholic Church in Spain, had some power. He decided he was going to make everybody in that country Catholic, and he was going to kill those who weren't Christian. He had killed over 2,000 people before somebody came to him and said, do you realize that a lot of the people you killed were Christians? And at that point, he realized that you couldn't tell what a person's religion was by looking at them. So he decided he would find a way to determine by looking at them who decided to live and who deserved to die, who deserved to live and who deserved to die. He called everybody was a shade of brown in that country and all over the world, just as they are now. At that point, we were all just members of the family of man. But he decided that he would call the lighter brown people white because white is the color of goodness and purity. He would call the darker skinned people black because black is the color of savagery and evil. So he put us at polar opposites at that point. Here are the white people who are good, pure, and good. Here are the black people who are savage and evil. So it was in white people's best interest to kill those who were savage and evil because you could tell by looking at their color that they were savage and evil. That is how stupid this whole thing is. That is how it began. And the word race to mean a specific group of people, a separate group of people, came out of France in 1580. Now, people say to me when I'm doing when I'm talking to a group, well, it's always been this way. No, it hasn't always been this way. It started in the late 1400s and was then turned into something that really made some sense by the French in 1580. This is ridiculous. There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race, and we all belong to that race. Those folks, those dark brown folks who evolved in sub-Saharan Africa over 300,000 years ago were able to travel across the face of the earth without any modern any modern skills, any modern stuff. They were able to travel from Africa, from the equator, north into the most northern points of the world, And as they traveled farther and farther from the equator, their bodies produced less and less melanin because they were exposed to less and less sunlight. So their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. Their brains didn't get smaller and their brains didn't get larger, but their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. It is totally ridiculous to judge people on the basis of the amount of chemical in their skin. And we're still doing it in 2025. Right now, we have a so-called president who is going to bring white people from South Africa to this country because they are being discriminated against in their homeland. People, think about that. Those people that he's going to bring from South Africa, number one, are white. But their skin is light enough that he'll bring them to this country because he is concerned about the fact that, you remember when he said, when he was first president, in his first 4 years, he said, we're going to build a wall along the southern border of Mexico, because if we don't, those brown-skinned people will be coming in here, and brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. He said that in his first term as president. Tell me he isn't a racist. Tell me he isn't an ignorant racist. Tell me that the 42% of the Republican Party that voted him into where he is are equally racist. And you need to know that we've got to give up calling that party the Republican Party, because Donald Trump has knocked the letter L out of the word Republican because of his fascination and obsession with the pubic area. They are now should be called the Republican Party because that's what they are. They are following a person who is interested. It used to be that Republicans were interested in the public arena. No, now they're interested in the pubic area. And look at the people he has put on his cabinet. It's absolutely terrifying, particularly in view of what we have heard them doing this week when they used the communication things they had in an absolutely unlawful and idiotic way. We're in very strange trouble right now because we are mostly pale, stale males are scared to death that they're going to be outnumbered. And they're right. They are. They have always been outnumbered. Only 15 to 18% of the human population of the earth is classified as white. And that's a misnomer because we aren't white, but we are lighter skinned than a whole lot of other people. But that doesn't make us white and it doesn't make us right. But they're scared to death that they're going to be outnumbered, and they are. They're going to, and here's one of their major fears. They're afraid because they know, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, right? The golden rule. Many of them have learned that as children, and they are afraid that those who are of different colors are afraid that when we get power, when women and people of color get power, we're going to do unto them as they have done unto us because we think they want to be treated the way they treated us. That's not what they want. They want to be treated better than they've ever treated the rest of us, and they will get treated better than they have ever treated the rest of us, because the first time I did that blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, I was just shocked at what my brown-eyed kids were willing to do to the blueies. It was just awful. They knew suddenly, and I didn't know this, I didn't realize this, every one of those brown-eyed people who were on the top knew how to treat someone in a racist way because they had learned it in their home. They had learned it from their parents, their grandparents. They learned it in the school. They learned it from the coaches. They learned it from the teachers, and they learned it from the history books. So they knew exactly how they dared teach those who were considered less than they were for the day. I couldn't stand the sight of any of the brown-eyed kids by the end of the day, because after I told them that I made the blue-eyed people sit in the back of the room and I moved the brown-eyed people up to the front, and I said, now, blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They're as clean as brown-eyed people. They're as civilized as brown-eyed people. And little brown-eyed Debbie in the front row raised her hand and said, how come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes? And I thought, well, you little shit. Now, I had never felt like that about a child before. And it's a good thing I didn't open my mouth, because how and who? Oh. And then blue-eyed Alan Moss in the back row said, oh, Debbie, you don't talk about her that way. She's doing this because it's good for us. Debbie didn't think it was good for us. I pulled down the map that afternoon. The ring riddle slipped off my thing, and the map went around the roller the way it does in that old Excedrin commercial. And I said, well, I've done it again. And little brown-eyed Debbie said, well, I expect you've got blue eyes, haven't you? And I thought, oh, and I could see, in my mind's eye, I could see myself backhanding that little brown-eyed witch against the wall. I wanted her to fly through the wall, fly through the air, hit the wall, and slide down like a broken egg. And I wanted her to be it. Have you ever felt like that about someone?
Of
I
course.
hadn't until that moment. And I thought, oh my God, this is how people of color feel about me every time I open my mouth. And I couldn't say to her, don't say that, but Alan Moss did. Alan Moss said, Debbie, her eyes ain't got nothing to do with it. You know, she never has been able to pull that down that map right. And I didn't say, Alan, don't talk about me that way. I said, thank you, Alan, because he was protecting me, defending me because of the color of my skin. It had nothing to do because of the color of my eyes. It had nothing to do with my being his teacher. It had to do with the fact that he had blue eyes and he was all right. So my blue eyes, it wasn't my eye fault. My eyes that caused the problem. It was the most amazing experience I've ever had. And I went home that night. It was Friday night. And on Monday, I went back into the room, just really upset about knowing that those blue-eyed kids were going to be on top and they were going to get even. So I separated them according to color. I made the blue-eyed people put on the armbands, put the blue-eyed people in the front of the room, and I waited for the blue-eyed people to get even. They didn't get even. And I waited for them to treat the Browns as the Browns had treated them. It didn't happen. So on Tuesday morning, it was over. We got in the magic circle, and I said to those kids, and in the magic circle, you can ask whatever you want to, and it will be dealt with. I said to those kids, you blue-eyed boys said you were going to get even with the brownies. You didn't get even. Why didn't you get even? And those kids, almost in a chorus, said, because we found out how it feels to be on the bottom, and we didn't want to make anybody feel the way we felt when we were on the bottom. Now, you see,
Wow.
I think if we could show that film often enough, or if we could show that debriefing often enough, and realize that people whom we call black do not want to get even. They want to get equity. They want to get equitable treatment under the law. They don't want to get even because you can't get even from the harm that racism has done to you. You can't fix that, but you
Mhm.
can see to it that other people don't have to live with it. And I have asked people of color, do you want to get even with all white peoples? And they say, no, I want to get, and then I say, do you want to get even with one or two? And everybody raised their hand. Yeah, they want to get even with one or two, but they don't want all people who we call people of color, or we call black, who aren't black, but all people of color, all black people do not want to get even with all white people, but every one of them wants to get even with one or two. Now, what we so-called white people have to do is behave in such a way that we aren't one of the one or two they want to get even with.
Mhm.
And we could do that. We could change our behaviors. You can't change your skin color. You can't change where you came from. You can't change what you're thinking, but you can change what you say and what you do. And we are judged by what we say and what we do. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
You surely want to ask another.
I do, several. I want to ask some more about you, because I think a lot of people know who you are based on what you do, but maybe not based on, who you were before all of this. So I want to know who taught you, what shaped you, and what moments in your early life made you see the world differently and refuse to accept it as it was.
Well, I was the third daughter born. My mother had a boy, and then she had two girls, and she was going to have a boy. She was sure she was. And I came out a girl. And she never forgave me for it. To the day she
Mm.
died, she never forgave me for it. Every time we had company, somebody would say, oh, you've got two boys and three girls. And my mother would say, and I'd be sitting there or walking there or playing there. And she'd say, yes, I wanted a boy, but she came out a girl. And so I told Lloyd to name her. And my father named me Mabel after his sister, whom he loved and whom my mother hated and who returned the favor. And he let my only brother at that time, who was in first grade and reading in the Scott Forsman reading book. So he named my middle name is Jane because Dick and Jane. So now, until the last few years, men walk up to me and say, me, Dick, you, Jane. Well, I finally learned to say, I knew you were a dick before you said it. Now go talk to somebody else. Because you build up. I think the reason I understand what it's like to be the other is because I have been the other all my life. I was a middle child, and I was the one my mother did not want. And I understood that, but I didn't have to appreciate it, and I didn't have to go along with it, and I didn't have to refuse to succeed because she said I never would. And she said openly, you'll never amount to anything. And I used to think, well, isn't that interesting? Because I had a couple of siblings who were absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm not brilliant, but I am smart enough to know that not being a boy doesn't mean that I have to be less than. And not looking like her side of the family doesn't mean that I have to be treated as though I'm less than. But you get used to that after a while, and then you can relate to those who have lived with it for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And I have been the other all my life. I went into with my family, and I went into teaching, and I taught what I thought was right and what my father said was right. And the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And my life has changed drastically because of that. My mother kicked me out of the family after my father died because she said, "You've embarrassed everybody. You've embarrassed us in this community with that eye color thing." And I said, "Mom, there's only 1,000 people in Riceville. That can't be all that bad." She says, "I don't want to ever see your face again." So I never saw my face again my mother's face again until 2 weeks before she died. And then she didn't recognize me. And that wasn't unfortunate because she never had really known me. She didn't want to know me. I was the one who didn't look like her side of the family, and I wasn't a boy. So I relate to people who have been treated unfairly because of somebody else's self-imposed ignorance very well.
I was going to ask you, do you think that your experience with your mother gave you maybe a drive to want to help those who were also other?
It taught me how not to behave. And it taught me how to see those who are different from myself. And it taught me how to not see that difference as being negative. What you are as a result of your adaptation or your response to the natural environment has nothing to do with how smart you are, or how kind you are, or how worthy you are, or how worthwhile you are. Those are physical characteristics, have nothing to do, as long as, even if you have a physical problem, you still don't have to be judged unfairly on the basis of that physical problem. To judge people on the basis of physical characteristics over which they have no control is absolute ignorance, and we need to stop doing it.
So you mentioned the town that you grew up in. It was a small town in Iowa. Would you say Riceville?
Yes.
Only 1,000 people, huh?
On a good day.
I'm sure that place wasn't likely having conversations about race and privilege in a way that may have done anything to help those who were underprivileged. Do you remember the first time that you saw injustice and knew that if you didn't stand up for it, that something was not going to continue to go the right way for you?
You mean racial injustice?
Yes.
Because I saw religious injustice on a daily basis. My mother was a casual Catholic and my father was a believing Baptist. So we had that kind of that friction in our house all the time. So when we got ready to go to church, we had to choose which one we wanted to do. And my father was really determined that we would not become Catholics, and my mother was equally determined that we would. So I saw that, and it didn't come, it wasn't on the surface all the time, but it was always underneath there was that. So I recognized that. I understood that. And I became a Methodist. My sisters and one of my sisters and all my brothers became Catholics because they needed to be accepted by my mother. I didn't need to be accepted by her. I didn't learn about racism based on skin color but I did because my father used to say, you can't judge a book by its cover or a man by the color of his skin. And I thought, that's right. He's absolutely right about that. And then I got old enough to be dating. And he said, don't be bringing any pickaninnies into my house as grandchildren. And I thought, wait a minute. You can't judge a book by its cover or a man by the color of his skin. So my father had that. That made me upset. And I didn't like it because I thought he was perfect until I heard that. And then I went to college and found out what racism is about. And I realized that I had been raised in a racist environment. And as long as I had gone along, I could get along. And then at the college level, I realized that if I went along, I would get along. But if I resisted, I was going to be in big trouble. I was working my way through college. I couldn't afford to be in big trouble. I had to get my standard elementary certificate and get out and go to work. So I did that for 2 years. And then I went to teaching and I met my husband. And then everything I knew flew out the window. But anyway, I met my husband and we Moved to Waterloo, Iowa. He ran a supermarket for a National Tea Company. National Tea was headquartered in, I think, Chicago, Illinois. We were in the store was located in the north end of Waterloo, which was called the black section. Only they used the N word, but it was the black section. So my husband was doing business with people who he had learned to not trust, and then he learned that he could trust them, and he learned that his living depended on them. And he had one black employee, and the black employee, Jim Jackson, decided to go to college, so he was going to quit. And my husband got a telephone call from the leader of the NAACP in Waterloo, and she said, "Daryl, we're going to pick at your store." He said, "Why would you pick at my store?" "Because you don't have a black employee." "Send me a black employee." "No, we want to pick at your store." So she picketed the store. And it wasn't very successful, but it taught my husband and me a lot, because after those so-called black people picketed the store, National Tea Company decided to move the store across the river, to take it out of the northern section of Waterloo, which was the only place they could get groceries. They closed that store and moved it across the river onto a street that was on a 4-lane highway. Now, people coming from the west into that store weren't going to stop and pick up groceries on their way to work. And going home, they weren't going to cross that highway to come in and pick up groceries. It was absolutely the worst place to put it. Daryl told him not to do that. He said, "Don't put it there. You're going to lose all your customers." No, they picketed us, and we're going to get even with them. So they got even with them. The store lasted about a year and a half with Daryl after that, because he had no customers. So they blamed it on him, and he kept telling them, "I told you." So they fired him. So we moved back to Riceville, and we went into another line of work. So we learned so much. Daryl learned, and I learned so much from those customers who were people who were melanaceous and melanotic, but the word for them was black. And they were the people who stole from him were not those people. It was the man who came in to work on his licensing, but the federal government. And it was absolutely ridiculous. But we learned an immense amount from those people. Daryl learned how to relate positively to people who were different, physically different from himself, different in so many ways, but alike in the one way: we were all human beings. And he regarded them as human beings who deserved equitable treatment under the law and deserved equal treatment in that store, because he depended on them, and they depended on him. And National Tea took that store away, and I've never forgotten it and never will. I think National Tea stores in Iowa, many of them were picketed during that week. I haven't seen a National Tea store in Iowa for a very long time. You cannot, now that the time has come now, but you cannot continue to do this stuff, because now that's one good thing about television. When you do this nonsense and it hits television, all of a sudden you can't hold it anymore. You can't pretend it's not happening. Everything this fool does that we call Mr. President, everything that he does comes out on television, and so do all of his members of his cabinet. And they cannot claim brilliance. They cannot claim that they're being just. They cannot claim that they're being good Christians. They cannot claim that they're being moral, when we're seeing the things they're doing and hearing the things they're saying. So if they were smart as they think they are, they would avoid cameras like the plague. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. Television ought to be a wonderful thing. And at the beginning, I thought maybe it would be. But there was a man named Marshall McLuhan in the late 50s, early 60s, who said, "Keep your kids off television. It will ruin their brains." I thought, well, that's a terrible thing to say. Kids get a lot of good off. Oh, he was right. He was right. You go into a classroom today, and students today, and I found this out when I was teaching, because when I went to teaching, my first teaching job was in Randall, Iowa. And all the kids had televisions except one. And they were just crazy about television. And I had to keep my lessons down to the time it would take for them to go to a commercial. They became addicted to commercial time. I could go for 5 minutes. That was the most, and then I have to stop and change what I was doing, because they were used to a commercial at that time. It was the weirdest thing. I thought, what's going on here? But their attention span, depended on whether or not they had a television in working order. And the first
Wow.
year I taught in Riceville, I had one student who didn't have a television. And he was on everything right now. He was he was the most involved student I've ever had at the third grade level. And then they got a television for Christmas. He completely changed after he got that television. He wasn't that excited anymore. He worked in 3 to 4 minute spurts. It was the strangest thing, and I thought, oh my God, Marshall McLuhan was right. Television isn't good for people. This is not good what's happening to these kids. And now you go in and they asked me to talk to a group of students in an elementary building, in middle school building in Austin, Minnesota. And but the kids were all still in class. So the person who invited me said, you can walk around and look in the rooms and see what you think. So I thought that'd be a good idea. So I did. And I looked in the rooms, and here there were children on high stools with a high table in front of them and a television set in front of them. And those kids were sitting there doing this, waiting for the teacher to come and correct their work. And I thought, my God, look at the time that's being wasted here. These kids aren't learning right now. They're waiting for the teacher to come and correct their work. 20 kids, 25 kids in a room. It was absolutely unbelievable. So then they all the I think it was fourth graders. So it wasn't middle school, it was fourth graders. So they all came, and got together in a room downstairs, and I stood in front of them. I said, now, people, I don't think you kids know how to listen. I'm going to teach you the listening skills, because 60% of what you learn comes to you through your ears. So I'm going to teach you the listening skills, and while I'm talking, you're going to practice them. Because if you don't, I'm going to make you feel bad. Make no mistake about this. I'm here because you need to hear what I'm here saying, and you can't hear if you're thinking about somebody else or if you're messing around. So here are the listening skills. I taught those kids the listening skills in about 7 minutes, and they never took their eyes off me, because this was a new experience for them, to have to practice the listening skills and to know that I was going to ask them questions after I had finished talking about what I said. If we would just teach children the listening skills and turn off the televisions, we would have better students. We would have more expressive students. We would have children who felt freer. Because if all you learn is what comes to you out of that Palm Pilot, that's not enough. There's a lot there, but kids aren't going to pursue the information that's there. They're going to pursue the entertainment.
Mm, so true. Well, Cousin Jane, you have seen a lot of things. You have a ton of experience under your belt, ton of knowledge. And like you said, a lot of people know what's happening and they choose not to do something about it because they need to get along or to get by. What was it that made you choose to stand up and do something different?
Oh, God. I did the exercise for 2 years, and then I think it was Canadian Broadcasting Company came and filmed in my classroom. And they gave me a copy of that film, and I took it and a projector up to the hotel that my husband and I own and where my parents lived. And I showed that film to my father and my mother in the dining room of the hotel. My father was about 60 years old at the time. He'd been farming all his life. He had raised 6 kids, lost one, raised the rest. He watched that film. He's third graders going through that blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And when it was over, he stood up and took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his bib overalls, blew his nose, wiped his eyes, and said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old.
That's huge.
Yeah, huge. Psychologists and psychiatrists can say, she shouldn't do that to those children. It's damaging to those children. And I remember my father saying, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old. He never forgot that film. He never forgot what happened to those kids. He never forgot the way he felt about it when he watched it. And after that, every time I'd go out of town to do a job, I'd drive back from the Rochester airport, come through Riceville, and stop to say hello. And he'd sit down and he'd say, now what'd you learn today? What'd you do this week? Tell me about what you did this week. Tell me about what happened this week. And he listened to every word I said, and he reacted like a man who didn't know but wants to know. It was absolutely fantastic. My mother would said, I've heard enough of this. And my dad would say, then go in the other room, Margaret. I want to hear what she has to say. So my mother would go in the other room so she didn't have to hear that. And my dad would listen and then ask questions and then say, well, I'll be damned. Did you really say that? Yeah. Well, I'll be damned. And what did they do? And I'd tell him. And he'd say, and of course, after I'd done the exercise, the teachers were really angry at me because, I got a lot of attention and they didn't appreciate the fact that I'd been on the Johnny Carson show and all the other stuff. So they were really vicious about me, and they do really ugly things all day. They must have spent a whole lot of time in the evening deciding what they were going to do to me the next day. They should have spent their time doing something else. But anyway, I'd go to the hotel and I'd tell my dad what happened that day, and he'd say, "Son," he said, "put your shoulders back, your head up, and smile a lot, and they'll wonder what the hell you've been up to." And I said, "I can do that." So I did that, and I'd walk through the hall humming and singing and thinking about what I was going to do with the kids in the next 5 minutes, a half hour or 2 hours, and just happy as if I had a good sense. And they, I think, had trouble understanding why I didn't give a damn.
Sure.
And that's what people have to understand, that you do this to them long enough. You treat people badly long enough because of your self-imposed ignorance. And eventually they'll come to the point where they don't give a damn. Mm. And when you need something from that group of people who may be a different color, you think are a different color from you, when you need something, they'll walk away. We can't afford to have people who are of a darker hue in this country walk away. We need them. We need one another. We need one another badly. And we need people who are educated to realize that we're all members of the same race, and we all have skin of a shade of brown. And the color of your skin is not what determines your character. Your character is determined by how you are raised by parents who know the difference, and who know the differences aren't negative. Differences are extremely valuable. And we have a right in this country and all over the world to express our sexual desires as we choose to. We now have a president who says there's only 2 genders, male and female, that's all. Somebody needs to teach him that there's something more than that you can produce. You can express your sexuality in another way, in hundreds of other ways. People need to know that what you have naturally, you have the right to use naturally, instead of the way we think you should use it.
Tell them, Cousin Dane.
Well, hey, we use the Bible and it says, "Judge not that ye be not judged." I judge constantly, because if I don't judge, I'm liable to recognize as positive something that is obviously extremely negative. I got an email from somebody, a man who is a person of color, and he said that this friend of his, when she found out that he was, after they'd been on the telephone, she found out that he was black, but he was very articulate. And she said in this letter to him, "You're a black man and you're so articulate." That's the word that we white women use to give you the right to be able to talk right, even if you are black. Mm. He's a strong black man, and he is so articulate. What the hell? Would she have said that if he had been a strong white man? Mm-hmm. See, he would. That's one of the things that we say. And I got one last week that said, "I'm colorblind. I don't see color." And so I had to write and say, "What do you do when you come to a stop sign?" Because if you stop, that means you see color. Mm. And when women say that to me, and it happens every time I do the exercise working with adults, or give a speech working with adults, some pale, stale female would stand up and say, "When I see people, I don't see people as black or brown or red or yellow. I just see people as people." And I say, "You don't see black or brown or red or yellow?" "No." "What do you see?" Well, she forgot to say white, didn't she? Mm. Because it's all right to see white, because that's the color of goodness and purity. Some woman will walk up to me invariably when I'm getting ready to go in to do a job, and say, "I don't see color." And I'll say, "I knew that before you said it, because if you saw color, you wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants." And I've said that to other women. If you saw color, you wouldn't dye your hair that color. That's not funny. I said, "You think I'm being funny?" I'm not being funny. I'm serious. I'm sorry that you don't see color, because it means that you have your hair a really strange color. I see color. I think it's all right. "Well, I think you took that wrong." I say, "No, it's not that I took it wrong. You said the wrong thing. And you said the wrong thing to the wrong person. And I know that now you can go home and tell whoever you live with the word that you listen to a bitch today, and you will call me bitch, and I realize that. That's the name men most use for me. That's the most word used where I'm concerned and men are concerned. And when somebody calls me the B word, I say thank you very much, because the is an acronym for me, which is an acronym for being in total control, honey. Yeah. And the only reason men call me a bitch is because they want to take me out of control. They want to prove to me that they can shut me down by calling me that word. No, when you call me that word, that means that you recognize that I'm in control, and you better walk softly, because I'm not impressed by your big stick. You understand that? Here we go, fellas. And then it's like, that woman's, be careful when you walk away to what you're going to say, because somebody's going to say to you, yeah, but she kind of shut you up on that one, didn't she? And I will shut them up on that one. And I will shut them up when somebody says to me, I voted for Trump. And I say, Trump, that word is an acronym. That wasn't his name in the beginning. His great grandfather changed his name when he came to this country. That wasn't his name. But Trump is an acronym for tyrannical, racist, untruthful, misogynistic pig. And I can prove every one of those. Hogs,
That'll upset a lot of people.
well, hogs crap in their trough. If you're a pig, you're likely to crap in your trough. And that's what's happening in this country right now, as we speak. Now, you'll have to cut that out of this film. I know that. But people need to realize that if you have someone who is tyrannical and a racist and untrustworthy and misogynistic, he is a pig. And we have the right to call it the way it is, instead of pretending that he deserves the job he has. We all know he doesn't. We all know he doesn't know how to do it. We all know that he has a friend from South Africa who has purchased this job for him and is now trying to purchase the Wisconsin election. And he says he can do it. And I would imagine that he can. But that says something about our freedom and our democracy. I'm very, very concerned about losing our democracy. And I think that could happen in the next 3 years if we all don't wake up and pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are concerned about that.
Yes, they should be. And I know you don't want to hear this because we're talking about racism. But when you have a president who is an avowed racist, you have to talk about that fact, because he sets the tone for the rest of the country. And he signs legislation that if it's racist, he has the power to do that. And people seem to realize, or seem not to realize, or many of them, 42% of the Republican Party is in favor of what he says and does. This is dangerous, and we have to realize that. And we have to stand up and speak out. And I've been banned because of the evangelical Christians and the trumpeters. I've been banned on all college and university campuses because they don't want college students to hear what I have to say.
Wow.
See, but they've banned the writings of Mark Twain, Alice Walker, Dostoevsky, and Jane Elliott, among many others. I think I'm in good company.
You are. You
I
for
think
sure
so.
are.
I'm proud to be in that company. I'm not making much money, but that's okay. I don't have to use. I don't need much money anymore. So I fly here and there occasionally, but I have put enough away that I can live carefully for the rest of my life. And that shouldn't be many more years. After all, I'm 91. I should have died a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad you haven't.
I'm not glad I haven't. Let me tell you something. If somebody gives you the chance to get old, turn it down. Getting old is not fun. It's hard work, because you look around you. I remember my father ranting and raving when Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933. I was born in 1933. From 1933 until 1945, I heard my father just ranting about what Adolf Hitler was doing. Here I am, 91 years later, ranting about what a man who is a Hitlerite is doing in the United States of America, with the help of a racist from South Africa. This should not have happened. almost 100 years, and we haven't learned enough to put a stop to this. We haven't learned enough even to recognize what it is. Because most of us don't remember Adolf Hitler, don't remember the Second World War. Those of us who do remember are dying, and those who don't remember wish I would die. But there's something they have to know. Somebody said a long time ago, no power on earth can stop a man with a dream or an idea whose time has come. Now, I'm not a man and I don't have a dream, but I know that the idea of one race and one color group is an idea whose time has come. And because those who call themselves white are in an even smaller and smaller minority in this country and worldwide, the idea of being a member of the brown human race is an idea whose time has come, and nobody is going to be able to stop it.
And tell them. I want to give you an opportunity to actually talk about what happened in the classroom, because there may be some people who are unfamiliar with it. So if you could, would you walk us through what the actual demonstration was and what you did and how it went?
They came in that morning. Stephen Armstrong said, "Hey, Elliot, they shot that king last night. Where did they shoot that king?" I turn into a soup sandwich, as my son would say, every time I remember that day, because it was so horrible. I had gone home the night before carrying the teepee that we were going to wash. I was going to wash and dry and iron. We were going to put it up in my classroom the next morning because we were studying the Indian unit. And we were going to put it up in the classroom and sing Indian songs and read Indian language, do the things that you do. And I walked toward the house and the telephone was ringing. I walked into the house. I answered the telephone. It was my sister. And she said, "Is your television on?" I said, "No." She said, "You better turn it on." I said, "Why?" "Because they shot him." I said, "Who'd we shoot this time?" Because we had been in a shooting mood. We had already killed both the Kennedys, right? And she said, "Martin Luther King Jr." And I get sick to my stomach when I remember that, because for an instant, my world stopped spinning. I couldn't believe what she had just said. We couldn't have done that. I said, "Mary, you can't be serious." She said, "Turn on the television." So I turned it on. And there were these people, these pale, stale males, talking about the killing of this man, as if they didn't understand why he would put himself out there like that. If he hadn't done that, he would still be alive. The things I was hearing made no sense. Well, I got my kids, fed them supper. I had 4 children, gave them their supper, got them into bed. I washed and dried the teepee. I was ironing it on the living room floor. The television was on, and there were 3. Walter Cronkite was interviewing 3 members of what we call black community, and he said to those 3 men, when our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Who's going to keep your people in line?" And I thought, wait a minute. When our leader was killed, wasn't Martin Luther King Jr., wasn't JFK the leader of all of us? Was he only the leader of white people? When our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Wait a minute. His widow didn't hold us together. We flew apart. I couldn't believe that Walter Cronkite would said that, because I had thought, because I'd been raised watching Walter Cronkite on television after he got television, I was sure that God looked like Walter Cronkite. All of a sudden, Walter Cronkite didn't look like God anymore. So I changed the channel. And there was another pale, stale male saying to 3 leaders of the black community, "Don't you Negroes think you should feel sympathy for us white people because we can't feel the anger at this killing that you Negroes can?" And I thought, that was Harry Reasoner. And I thought, that's it. I've heard enough. I rolled up the teepee. I threw it into the closet. I turned off the television. I went out and got my husband supper, because he worked nights at a tractor plant at that time. And he came in from work and he put his arms around me, and I was crying because I thought, what have we done? And what are we going to do? And what's this country coming to? And how could we do this? And how uncivilized are we? I was just beside myself. And he put his arms around me. He said, "They killed him, didn't they?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Jen, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to do what we do in this country." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm going to separate my kids according to the color of their eyes tomorrow, and I'm going to discriminate against those who have the wrong color eyes." He said, "You can't do that. You'll lose your job." I said, "I don't want to work here. I don't want to teach here if I am fired for doing the right thing." "This is the right thing, Daryl." He said, "You're going to lose your job, Jane." I said, "Well, I'm all right. You've got a job. I'll go to work cleaning houses. I'll do something. I'll still be able to help support this family, but I will not I will not calmly and quietly go through this killing and do with this about this killing what some of those teachers are undoubtedly doing. He said, "You're going to be sorry." I said, "Well, maybe I will." Went to bed. It was really scary because he couldn't support me in this. I got up the next morning, got ready for school. He was feeding the kids breakfast, and I started out the door, and he said, "You going to do that thing you said?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "You're going to be sorry." He said, "Why are you still going to do that?" I said, "Is Martin Luther King Jr. still dead?" And I left quickly because I didn't want him to see the tears in my eyes, because I didn't want him to know how badly I was hurt by the fact that he didn't understand what I was talking about, and he wouldn't support me in it. So I went to work, and Stephen Armstrong, the first person in the room, first student, came in. "Elliot, hey, Elliot, they shot that preacher last night. Why did they shoot that preacher?" I said, "We're going to talk about that, Stephen." So we talked about it. And I asked those kids what they knew about people, black people. We call them black people, what they knew about black people. They knew every negative stereotype that I had ever heard, some that I had never heard. And I said to these little kids, I think they were 26 maybe at that time, "How do you people know these things?" Every one of them said, "Because my dad said so." And I thought, well, you're going to be a different father when you leave this classroom. If you ever have children, you're going to be different fathers than what your fathers are, because I'm not going to tolerate this, and I'm going to see to it that you have a different attitude when you leave this classroom. I said, "You kids have any," after they had said all these ugly things, I said, "You kids have any idea how it would feel to be something other than white in this country?" "No." "Would you like to know?" Yeah. I said, "Would you like to do something today that will help you know it?" Yeah. It sounded like fun, because everything we did in my classroom was fun, because I think you learn more if you're having a good time. I said, "Okay, we're going to judge people by the color of their eyes, because eye color and skin color are caused by the same chemical. So if it makes sense to judge people by the color of their skin, it makes equally good sense to judge them by the color of their eyes, because your eyes are closer to your brain. So we're going to judge people by the color of their eyes." They said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. When you give blue-eyed people something nice, what do they do with it?" One of them said, "They tear it up." I said, "How do you know that?" "Because her desk is always dirty." I said, "Okay, so now we found out that at least one blue-eyed person is exactly how we describe them, aren't they? Isn't she and aren't they?" And that's when Debbie said, "How come you're the teacher if you got them blue eyes?" I got a horrible taste of racism and a horrible taste of my own ignorance. I watched blue-eyed kids who could, I'll never forget the one. She was reading at the 6th grade level until the day we did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, and then she couldn't read at the 3rd grade level. Her learning ability dropped drastically because she was living down to my expectations of her. On the other hand, I had a number of dyslexic boys in that room. They couldn't spell the day before. The day they were on the top in that exercise, the day they were brown-eyed and on the top, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell, because they had the right color eyes. And I know it sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not making it up. It was like, my God, what have I done? I went down to the teacher's lounge at noon because I needed some support. Walked into the lounge, and there were probably 8 or 10 teachers in there. It was the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, and I told them what I was doing in my classroom. And one of the 3rd grade teachers said, "I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic." Well, she might as well have done the extra stuff. She hadn't done the reading, writing, and arithmetic. The other one was over 60 years old, had been teaching molding young minds for a good long time. And she said, this is exactly what she said: "I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch." Nobody frowned. Nobody gasped. Nobody said, "Helen, how can you say that?" Every one of those pale, stale females either laughed or chuckled and smiled and nodded their heads. She was right and I was wrong. And I went back to the classroom. I had thought I would end the exercise after lunch because of what my kids were going through. I decided on the way back to my classroom that not only would I finish the day as I had started it, but I would reverse the exercise on Monday so that the blue eyes would get the same treatment that the brown eyes had gotten. I refuse to allow any person to leave my presence with those attitudes unchallenged. I couldn't change those teachers' attitudes because they're sure they were right. I could change those children in such a way that they wouldn't behave and talk the way those teachers did when they got to the age when they could be teachers. And I finished the day with those blue-eyed people on the bottom, those brown-eyed people on the top. Brown-eyed people were anxious they would have stayed for weeks because they were having so much fun. Blue-eyed people just wanted to get out of that room. They wanted to go home. So they got on the bus, they went home, and I thought, Monday is going to be hell. Oh, what have I done? We had made arrangements to go out to the lake with some friends whose son was in the same class that my son was. One of my sons was. The mother called Friday night and said, we can't go out to the lake because Rick is sick. I said, oh, I'm sorry. Well, we're going to go, but I hope Rick gets to feeling better. Oh, he will. I'll take care of it. But I'm sorry we can't go. I said, I am too. Well, we'll see you later. I hope he's well enough to go to school on Monday. Oh, he will be. So we went out. My husband and my kids and I packed up and went out to the lake. And as we walked toward the lake, there were Rick's parents and parent Rick and his brother sitting at the picnic table with all their friends. And as we walked toward it, one of the men said, did somebody bring the watermelon? And Daryl jerked. And my two older kids, Brian said, we could cut them up and use them for bait. I said, stop it, kids. Let's go to the lake. We came out here to fish. So we went out here to fish. But the kids that went through the exercise had told their parents about it. And from that day on, I was seen as Riceville's only N-word lover. Now, I don't mind being called an N-word lover. That means I'm not an N-word hater.
Mm.
And I would rather be a lover than a hater any day of the week. It was horrible for my 4 children, especially my 2 oldest kids, after I did the exercise, because they were beaten, they were spit on, their belongings were destroyed. They were treated as bad as if they had been the wrong color in Riceville, Iowa. And I think 3 years later, the principal's wife, who taught at the junior high level, stopped me on the way to a teacher's meeting and said, Jane, you've got to get your kids out of the school. I said, why would I do that? She said, because these kids, these teachers are abusing your children. They're trying to harm your children and they're having fun doing it. Get your kids out of here. They're trying to destroy your children. So I went home, called my husband, said, we're moving. He said, all right. He called a real estate agent. We looked for a house. That's a long story. Found one. An old schoolhouse, moved into it, and then that following year, they didn't have to go and put up with the abuse that they took from the teachers in Riceville. It was a learning experience, and because of it, my daughter will be angry at me for the rest of my life. Because she figures that she shouldn't have had to go through that. She shouldn't have had to go through that. And it must be my fault she's going through it. No, the fault is in the people who would treat my daughter that badly, because I dared to say, you don't have to be white to be right. And number 2, there ain't no people who are white. So let's get over it. Should we just join the human race? You aren't allowed to say that in most small towns in Iowa.
That night when your husband came home and you told him you were going to do it, and the next morning when you walked out teary-eyed, did you ever think that that demonstration would become as big as it was and have as much, I guess, as many repercussions? I mean, positive and negative.
I didn't think it would ever get out of Riceville. I really didn't. I didn't think it would ever get out of Riceville. But I made a big mistake. After the kids had gone through the exercise, and before we got into the magic circle, I had each child write a 4-paragraph composition telling, on Tuesday after the exercise was over, I had each child write a 4-paragraph composition telling who Martin Luther King Jr. was, how the child felt on Friday, how the child felt on Monday, and what discrimination is. When they had finished writing, they got it done, and we got in the magic circle. They read their essays, and it was like, oh my God, it was like, this is a psychology course. It only cost me my self-control and my self-image. And listen to what these kids are saying about how it felt to be in that situation. It was absolutely fantastic. So I gave those to my mother so that she would understand that what I did wasn't harmful, and it was good for those kids, that they learned a great deal. She showed them to the editor of the local paper. He asked if he could print them. There's nothing that goes on in my classroom that is a secret. I said, go ahead and print them. But all hell's going to break loose. And he said, I'm going to print the stories. He did. And all hell broke loose. It got really ugly. And I can laugh now because most of the teachers who are trying to destroy my children are dead. And while I have trouble believing in death. I think your body, your physical body dies, but I think that your mind is pure energy, and energy can neither be destroyed nor created. So that the energy that is your mind when you get here was here before you got here. And how you use it is what determines what you are as a human being. I think that the energy of that exercise for those teachers who have died, is going to be with them for eternity. And they're going to understand it and accept it and act like the Christians they say they are, or they're going to live with that, to die with that horror for eternity. They were absolutely horrified at what I did to those children, because they didn't see it as doing it with those children or for those children. It was to those children. It was done with them and for them, so that they wouldn't be the kind of people that we are, that we were taught to be, that we were expressly taught to be. And what the governor of Florida is telling educators they must teach children in Florida today. You are not allowed to teach about slavery and what white people did, the governor says, because it'll make these white kids feel guilty. I don't want white children to feel guilty. I want them to feel responsible. I want to start teaching the 3 R's, not of reading, writing, and arithmetic, because only one of those words begins with R. Reading begins with R, arithmetic begins with an A, and writing begins with a W. So that doesn't make any sense. We ought to stop talking about that. But there are 3 R's: rights, respect, and responsibility. If we would teach that every student, every janitor, every secretary, every administrator, every educator in a school system has the rights to be respected, and if you don't respect them, you'll be held responsible. If we would teach the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility, we could do away with racism. But instead, we're teaching racism because it's another R.
So true.
And it's unfortunate that it's true, but it is true. I'm not imagining this, and I'm not making it up so I can get famous. If you want to get infamous, do what I do, because you'll find out how it feels to be somebody who stands up and says, your self-image is what you choose, and your self-image depends on the amount of chemical in your skin. Do you realize how ridiculous that is?
I wish more people did. What you experienced after the demonstration was, awful. I'm sure there's been much more since then, right? Haven't you gotten hate mail and threats and
I've gotten
things of that
hate
nature?
mail, and they had to take me out of Uniontown, Pennsylvania at midnight because the teachers that I put through the exercise in a very simple way in the morning called the superintendent in the afternoon and said, if you don't get that bitch out of town, we're going to shoot her. Now, at that time, they had several people be shot in Uniontown. So after I did it's a long story, and I don't have time to tell it, but after I'd finished my second day of work there, these people, melanaceous and melanotic people, like, protected me all the time, the rest of the time I was in Uniontown. And when it was time to get on, we weren't supposed to go to the other place, Harrisburg, until the next morning. But the boys said, you're going tonight. I said, why? I'm supposed to go to work. We're going tonight. And I didn't know why. I said, all right, we'll go tonight. He said, 3 carloads of blacks followed Anna S. Cunningham from Uniontown to Harrisburg, anyway, to get me out of Uniontown, Pennsylvania, because they didn't want me to be shot while I was in Uniontown. Strange. Wow. The way when we got to the highway, the 4-lane highway out of Uniontown, it took quite a while to get there. And I said, what's going on here, Miss Cunningham? She said, Jane, we didn't want to tell you, but the superintendent was told if we didn't get that out of town, they're going to shoot you. I said, well, I'm kind of glad you didn't tell me. She said, yeah, you didn't have to know that. We're going to get you out. So these 3 carloads of blacks, 1 carload in front of us and 2 behind us, took us to the whatever, to take us to Harrisburg. And they turned back when they got to the whatever highway that was. And she went on into Harrisburg, and we went into a motel, and I worked in Harrisburg the next day. And then she went back to her home. And so after that morning, the next morning, I was there overnight. And the next morning, I woke up and I got my stuff ready to go. and I had my luggage cart handle in my hand and my purse over my shoulder. And I opened the door to the motel and I looked out, and I was at the end of a motel, of the 2-story motel, and above me, on 4 sides, there were windows looking down on this hotel, on the what do you call it, court. And I looked up and I thought, behind one of those windows could be the person who was sent here to shoot me.
Mm.
And I pushed my luggage cart back. I closed the door, and I thought, now you got a decision to make. You can stand here and be terrified and never do this work again. Or you can take put that purse over your shoulder, take hold of that luggage cart, and walk out of here, and walk down and sign out and go home. You've got kids and a husband waiting at home. What are you going to do? And I took that luggage cart handle in my hand, and I put my purse over my shoulder, and I opened that door, and I walked quickly to the desk. I didn't run because I figured you run because you're scared. No, you're scared because you run. Once the adrenaline starts to run, then you have to run too. And I wasn't going to let them see me running. So I walked quickly, but calmly. And inside I was scared to death. And I got to the desk and I thought, well, you damn dummy, look what you've done. You allowed them to scare you almost to death. This will never happen again. And I have not been scared since. And I've been threatened with death lots of times. But when I was still going on college campuses, every time I'd go on the campus for the last 7 years, there'd be 3 little boys sitting in the front row or the second row or the third row with their red caps on that say, "Make America Great Again." What they really mean is, make Americans grovel again. Donald Trump doesn't want to make this country great. He wants to put us in our place. And those 3 guys are sitting there and they're talking and they're all doing this and pointing their little guns at me like this. And I'll stop what I'm saying. Okay, fellas, I know what you're doing. I know you want to kill me. You want to see me dead because of what I do to decrease the level of racism in this country. You have every right to kill me if that's what you want to do. But you want to remember, if you kill me because of what I'm doing, you might make a martyr out of me, and then you might have to spend the rest of your life celebrating Jane Elliott Day once a year. Now, do you want to do that? And they'll go, no, no, no. And they make a cross out of it. No, no, no. I said, then shut up and listen while I'm talking. And by then, all the kids of color are doing this, and they've all identified those 3 boys. So before I finish my remarks, when I'm starting to slow down, those 3 guys get over the back of their seats, get to the aisle, and run out of the building just as fast as they can go, because now they've been identified. And they're having to live with the consequences of their behavior, not mine, because I don't say to the rest of the students, look at these 3 fools. I don't do that. I simply give them the attention they want. And then all of a sudden, that's not what they wanted. And they run out of there and they are scared to death, and they should be. Because you keep on saying that kind of thing and behaving that way and trying to destroy somebody who says that this is wrong, there's a better way to live. Then those who are on the receiving end of your abusive behavior have the right and a reason to get even. But they aren't. They aren't getting even. Right. Because, as my 3rd grader said, we found out how it feels to be on the bottom, and we didn't want to make anybody feel as bad as we did when we were on the bottom. Yeah. I've worked with people who are melanaceous, melanotic, and melanemic. And the melanaceous and melanotic ones are so forgiving, and so calm, and so determined, and know how it feels to think somebody could kill their kid on the way to school in the morning. Yeah. And we think they are less than. And I am absolute. You think? Yep. Here I've been doing this for 55 years, at least 68 until now. How many years is that? Doesn't matter. It's been a lot. I have seen such a change. When television first came out, all the commercials and all the people who read the news were pale, stale males because they knew everything. And the commercials were all about pale, stale folks. You know that? So do I. And then in the last 20 years, I've been watching, And now, all of a sudden, the commercials are families of melanaceous and melanotic people. It's absolutely fantastic. And many of the news people are pale, stale women or women who are melanaceous or melanotic. Things have changed so drastically, and we have a leader who thinks he can take it all away. He thinks he can take us back to the 30s. And that's what he has said. He wants to take us back to the good old days. And that's what Ronald Reagan wanted. He wanted to take us back to the good old days where women knew their place.
Mm.
I guess I've never found out what my place is.
I hope you never do.
I guess I never will. I never will find out what my place is because, number one, I'm not going to be buried. I'm going to have I'm going to be cremated and have my ashes scattered where nobody knows where they are, because I know that people would like to go and, as they have said, piss on your grave, Elliot. And I'm thinking, well, you'll have to find it first.
Mm.
And if they work that hard, they'll be too hard to do anything else but just get back in their car and go home. So you have to change your whole point of view changes drastically when you, for a little while in your life, learn what it feels like to be the way a third of the population of the United States is. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you have to hear what this meant. I hope it's in this one. I read this statement in either this book or the other one. Just a minute.
No worries.
I think it's, anyway, somebody in one of these books that I read this week, I read a lot because nobody wants to talk to me. I had lots of time to read. I shouldn't laugh, but really, if people are so dumb after all these years as to think that their skin color makes them superior, if they're still as dumb as to believe that, then you have to laugh because, okay. Authoritarianism thrives off inequality and myths that support it. Monarchy survived by a myth of divine selection. Dictators survive on the myth that one single leader defines and embodies the nation. Fascism survives off myths that create an outgroup who are relegated to second-class citizenship at best. Now, think about that. There's another statement in here. Oh, God. I got to find it because it is so important. This man knows what he's talking about. Democracy is an ideal. It is an ideal in which every citizen has political equality rooted in the recognition of all people's full humanity. And realizing the ideal of political equality is impossible without an understanding of who has been denied it and why. Without knowledge, we cannot act. Battles over education are battles over freedom. Mm. And our present chief executive has closed the Department of Education because he's afraid of people knowing more than he knows. So it doesn't take much to know more than he knows. But you cannot do to people what he's doing. Here it is. The story of the fight to preserve the innocence of white American children and justify American racial hierarchies is U.S. history. These efforts, once imagined to be a relic of the past, have come alive again, fueling the ascendant fascist political movements that inspired this book. If you haven't read this book, get this book and read it.
What's the name of it?
Oh, God. Erasing History. Isn't it Jason Stanley? It is full of statements that they resonate with me because of the exercise. There's one point in here, I think it's this man who says, you have to experience what other people are doing, and here it is. The challenge is the more difficult one of bringing people to the point of understanding the objective, historical, and existing conditions of groups with whom they have had no personal life experience. Compassion presupposes the ability to take the role of the other in some particularly subtle and informed way. And that is what happens when I do the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. Those kids are forced into the challenge of the more difficult one of bringing those kids to the point of understanding the objective, historical, and existing conditions of group with whom they have had no personal life experience. Compassion presupposes the ability to take, quote, take the role of the other, unquote, in some particularly subtle and informed way. And if you could give students the opportunity, my dad said to us when we were young, you can't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. The Indians taught this by the priests and by the ministers. Never judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. The day I did the exercise, that was going to be what we learned that day when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. I had planned that for the day. I had planned that the day before, but here came the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. And I decided these kids are going to walk in a black person's shoes for the day and see whether it teaches them anything. It taught them so that by the end of the day, they knew more about what I was saying than I did, because they were living what I had created for them. People who are called melanaceous, melanotic in this country have lived things that I've never had to live through. I've lived through some of it, but nothing like what melanaceous and melanotic people have lived through, because I'm melanemic, so I don't have to live with that. And I can pretend that my ancestors came from Ireland. I'm sorry, but the reason there were people in Ireland is because those people from Africa came to this country 15,000 years ago. And those who do not believe that need to get this National Geographic magazine for April of 2018 and just look at this one. If you don't want to read the whole thing, and many of you won't, just look at this picture. Look at this map. And it shows you where we came from and how we traveled to get where we are. And people, those who got to this continent, got here between 20 and 15,000 years ago. They were here before there were Indians, because they were what we call Indians. Indians came across that, came from Africa just like all the rest of us did. People need to take a look at this. They need to say to themselves, oh my God, we're all members of the same race. Well, why don't we have the same face? Because different faces aren't different races. Your body has adapted to the natural environment. It has nothing to do with being members of a different race. I never thought of that. Well, think of it. You can understand why I am not a popular person. However, this is On Tyranny, written by Timothy Snyder, 20 lessons from the 20th century. Everybody has to read this book because it tells you 20 things. It's just fabulous. If you just read the titles of the chapters, just listen to this. Do not obey in advance. And that's exactly what we're doing in this country right now. What would Donald Trump want us to do? Well, we better do it now. We're obeying in advance. Defend institutions like colleges and universities. Defend them. Defend the judicial department. Defend Congress. Defend institutions. It's a beware of the one-party state. That's what we're headed toward right now if we aren't careful. Take responsibility for the face of the world. Get up off your polyunsaturated fatty acids and get out there and protest when things are wrong, instead of sitting there turning the television so that you don't have to watch it because it raises your blood pressure, and stop watching those sitcoms and watch reality, because reality isn't ugly. And turn off Fox News. Because in the word come and some and love and other and mother, the O has the short U sound. Now, if you put that in the middle of the word fox, what do you get? You get what Rupert Murdoch does to the news. And you see him calling it a different kind of news. Stand out. Be kind to our language. Believe in truth. Believe in truth? You have to be careful who you vote for if you believe in truth in this country today. Establish a private life. Contribute to good causes. Listen for dangerous words. Be calm when the unthinkable occurs. Be calm when the unthinkable arrives, and that's exactly where we are right now. We are at the point where modern tyranny is terror management. Think about that. We can scare you into going along to get along. When the terrorist attack comes, remember that authoritarians exploit such events in order to consolidate power. The sudden disaster that requires the end of checks and balances, the dissolution of opposition parties, the suspension of freedom of expression, the right to a fair trial, and so on, is the oldest trick in the Hitlerian book. Do not fall for it. Now think about what's happening in this country today, right now. The sudden disaster that requires the ends of checks and balances. We are now doing things that right now, we are ignoring the Constitution in order to do ugly things like send people out of this country even though we're on visas. Can't do that, but we are now. The dissolution of opposition parties. We are trying to do away with everything except the Republicans. The suspension of freedom of expression. Right now, people who are saying things on television that our leader doesn't want to hear are losing their jobs and are being sued because we no longer have the freedom of expression. The right to a fair trial, think about that one, because that's the very thing that's happening. And all those are the oldest trick in the Hitlerian book. If you haven't read the book, When at Times the Mob is Swayed. Have you read it?
Mm-mm.
There's a book out there called When at Times the Mob is Swayed. I don't have it here. It's in Iowa. In that book, on page maybe 200, I'm not sure. Don't just go to the bookstore, take it off the shelf, and leaf through it until you come to the word Hitler. Donald Trump, according to this book, has in his bedside table, in a locked drawer, a copy of the book A New World Order, which contains the writings of Adolf Hitler. Now, when he first came to power, when he gave his speech at his inauguration, I was standing listening, and I thought, my God, this sounds Hitlerian. And then I said to him, you're imagining. Hey, come on, that's ridiculous. He isn't Hitlerian, you're wrong. And then I realized when I saw what he was trying to do, this is Hitlerian. And then I read When at Times the Mob is Swayed. I wasn't imagining. This man has said openly he wants his military to be like Hitler's military. He wants our soldiers and our generals to act the way Hitler's soldiers and generals did. Because, you see, he wasn't alive during the Second World War. He only read what Hitler wrote, but he never lived under Hitler. I was born in 1933. I think he's, 78? So he wasn't alive when Hitler was doing the horrible, horrible things he did. He doesn't realize how ugly that was. If he had lived through that, he would not be a Hitlerite today. He would say, we cannot allow this to happen. I remember my uncles coming back from the Second World War. They knew about war. And that wasn't how they wanted to live their lives, but they survived. One was on the aircraft carrier from which the planes took off to bound Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was torpedoed by a Japanese ship, and he floated in the water for hours in a life jacket while bodies of Japanese and American soldiers floated past him. My other uncle was in the Pacific theater of war, and it was his job as a soldier in the army to lie in the bushes and wait until a file of Japanese soldiers came by, wait until the last one was there, creep out of the bushes, throw a rope around that man's neck, a wire around that man's neck, corrode him to death, and put his body down back in the bushes, and then get his wire back and follow that line until he got some more.
Wow.
When they came home from the Second World War, they were different men than they had been when they went. The one who was in the Navy had wanted to be a music teacher and had completed his music education, but he had ruined his ears because of the guns on the battleship that he was on. So he couldn't become a music teacher. He sold insurance or something. The other one came home and had recurring bouts of malaria for the rest of his life. Young men who think that the military is just sitting in an office and running things on the computer have no idea what war is about. And nobody will sit down with them and tell them those things because those men don't want to frighten them. They don't want them to know what ugly things they had to do. They didn't want to admit that they were scared to death, nearly to death, but they did what they had to do. And most of the men who fought in the Second World War are now dead. But those of us who remember listening to their stories or watching and seeing the way they came back have never forgotten it. And people who are my age and listened to those stories and saw those movies the way they were on the news, not the way they are presented now, but the way they were on the news then, is an entirely different war than the one people are talking about. This is not a John Wayne war. This was not a John Wayne war. This was something totally different from what we were hearing, what these kids had been accustomed to being told. And now we have a governor who says, don't tell the truth about slavery. Make these white kids feel guilty. We didn't cause that war. We fought that war to see to it that we didn't become a nation ruled by a Hitler 91 years ago. You think it can't happen again? Unless we get off our polyunsaturated fatty acids and do something about it, it will happen again. Yeah. We are on the road to that right now because we are a nation of people who have been raised with self-imposed ignorance. Particularly those who are from 25 to 50 have spent their lives screen addicted. And most of what's on the screen, they will watch what makes them feel good.
Right.
Watching the truth about the Second World War will not make them feel good. Not if you watch the truth. It'll be all right if you watch the movies that were made about it. But if you watch the films that were actually taken at that time, you realize that blood and that gore and that horror were not admirable, were not pleasant, were not something that everybody escaped. And having your white headstone in a line of them in the cemetery isn't as good as coming home alive.
So true. Speaking of discomfort and people only wanting to see things that makes them comfortable, there is a clip that's going around on the internet where a white student in one of your lectures gets so uncomfortable with what you're saying that she leaves. What did that moment reinforce to you about how people react when faced with the truth?
They can't take it, and they'll leave to avoid it. And they will leave their neighborhood when families who are melanaceous or melanotic move into their neighborhood, they'll leave because they don't want to face their own ignorance and their own racism. And they don't want to admit that family, that melanaceous family that moved in, has just as much right to be there as they have. And probably they're going to take even better care of that home than the melanemic people who were there before did, because it means so much to them to have a home that is theirs, that they can afford, that is decent. So we talk about white flight. Look at this country. Look at how we have self-segregated in this country, and then blame segregation on people who are what we call people of color. We're all people of color, and you cannot move to get away from us because you are us. We have this. I'm so tired of people calling this country America. America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. All the people in all those countries are Americans. Mm-hmm. We've got to start calling this country the United States of America, because the most important word in that title is united. And we have now a set of people who are trying to make us into the divided states of North America. We've got to get past that. We've got to start saying the United States of America instead of America. Now, that's a lot more syllables than most people want to say. So then just say the United States. That's enough. If that's too much, then just say U.S. Because those two letters together spell the word us. Mm-hmm. And it means us. Those in the U.S., which is the United States of America. We've got to get the words under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I remember the year it was put in there, and I thought, what in the devil? Dwight Eisenhower went along to go along with the congressmen who want to put the words under God in the pledge. So every morning, little kids from the first grade to the sixth grade probably have to stand up in the morning, put their hands over their hearts. The little boys have movable hearts, and they go all over, mostly between their legs. And they say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag with the words "under God" in it. I finally reached the point when I was teaching third grade where I'd say to my students, kids, you don't have to say the words "under God" in the pledge if you don't want to. They don't belong there. They weren't there originally. They were put there in 1953. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. Because I had some children in my room those years whose parents didn't believe in praying publicly. And when you put the words "under God" in the prayer, you are praying publicly. Those kids didn't believe in that. So I said, if you don't want to say the words "under God" in the pledge, you don't have to. But don't sit down. Just don't say the words "under God." And they acted like, well, that works. And then a bunch of the rest of them thought, well, if they don't have to, we don't have to. It was delightful. Now, here's another thing we need to realize. It was about that time that we put the words "in God we trust" on our money. Now, think of the ridiculous reasoning there. If you believe in God, you don't care about money. But we put the words "in God we trust" on our money. When I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, I walked from the school down to the restaurant because my dad was there and he's going to give me a ride home. We lived 4 miles from town. He's going to give me a ride home. So I walked into the restaurant, and there on the wall was a sign with 2 sentences on it. It said, "In God we trust. All others pay cash." And I started to laugh. And my dad said, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "Look at that sign." And he read it and said, "By God, that's right. I believe that's right. That's brilliant." I said, "I think so too." So here's what I think we should do. Now, don't do this, people. But think about doing this. The next time you get a piece of paper money, paper American currency, where it says "in God we trust," with a really fine ballpoint pen, right under it, write, "all others pay cash." Now, if you're going to spend that, spend it someplace where nobody knows you so that they won't remember where they got it. And if enough of us do that, pretty soon the federal government is going to say, maybe we should go back to separation of church and state and take God off our coinage and off our currency. You think that'd be a good idea?
I do.
See, I think that would be a good idea. I think that would be one step forward. And it's one, you have to take one step at a time. And the first step towards separation of church and state is, and then the second step is, here's the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth step. Have you read Anthea Butler's White Evangelical Racism?
No.
Get Anthea Butler's White Evangelical Racism and read it. Evangelicals, by their faults, evangelicals participated. Jesus said, "By your fault you shall know them." Evangelical fruit, the result of evangelicals' actions in civic life today, is rotten. Racism rotted it. Now, this black woman knows what she's talking about. She has lived with what's going on in this country all her life, and she isn't afraid to say what she's lived with. And you've got to read what she says because she's right. Oh, mercy. What happens if evangelicals get everything they want? Oh, good Lord. I've asked this question to my remaining evangelical friends who still talk to me and are open and willing to engage in a conversation about current politics and issues. In this case, getting everything you want for most evangelicals means overturning Roe versus Wade. And they did it. Building a conservative Supreme Court. And they have. Creating a Christian nation, whatever that means, in quotation marks. Rescinding same-sex marriage, and somehow turning LGBTQ people into straights. A tall order. That's a very tall order. Evangelicals think they can do it. None of these wishes, however, addressed racism. That's the biggest problem. It means that even when you get what you want, you can still be a racist. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
If you can get all the things you want, you can still be a racist. Jesus was an Ethiopian Jew. According to the Bible, he had kinky woolly hair and feet of bronze. Have you ever seen a picture of him like that in a Methodist church?
Have you?
In a Catholic church? In a Baptist church? In any church? Only that in a black section. And sometimes you walk into a black church and there's a black Jesus. And white people get even whiter. They damn near pass out at the thought that some people would dare to kneel and pray to a black man, what they call a black man, with kinky woolly hair and feet of bronze. You want to make a change in this situation? Put a picture of the real Jesus as he really was, in every church, in every community in the United States. Now, you kill the churches, but you bring people to a realization that they haven't ever been brought to before. You're going to pray to God? You see, God is a spirit and has neither gender nor color. But we have created a God that looks like an old white man, like Charlton Heston playing Moses. That isn't God. We have to allow people to realize that your God may be very different from my own. But God is a spirit, has neither gender nor color. Some people can't pray to a spirit unless it's a male, pale, stale male. Sorry, Bob.
What do you say to people who say that racism isn't as bad as it used to be?
I say it's worse now. If you had said that to me 10 years ago, when Barack Obama got elected president of the United States twice, I would have said, you're right. Because I remember when Whoopi Goldberg said, now I can put my suitcase down, I don't have to leave the country, when Barack Obama got elected. I would have said that things were getting better. And then the racists went underground and worked to decide that as many of the congressmen said, he's not going to succeed. He's not going to get reelected. First they said he's not going to get reelected. He got elected. Then he said he's not going to get reelected. He got reelected. He's not going to be successful. They worked hard to keep him from being successful. We'd have made great, huge strides if it hadn't been for the racist congressmen who decided Barack Obama could not be allowed to be successful, because that would prove that we pale, stale people aren't superior after all. So they refused to allow him to succeed. And then we got the opportunity to have a melanaceous woman for president. And young melanaceous males did whatever they could to see to it that she didn't get elected, because they couldn't stand the thought of having a female president. What we have exposed in this country in the last 8 years is extreme racism, sexism, but we'll go along with ageism. Here we have a 78-year-old man who doesn't know, I won't say the way my son would describe it, but he doesn't know that, because he doesn't have to, because he's a billionaire. And if you have enough green, that's the only color you really care about.
Oof. That was strong.
It's not strong. It's common sense. And common sense in uncommon amounts is what the world calls wisdom. We're in a situation now where common sense is something that is to be frowned upon, because it is not what they're teaching in the schools. And if the kids in school haven't read On Tyranny, the social studies teachers are doing a bad job, because there's nothing in this book that kids can't understand. And if the teachers in the school haven't read Timothy Snyder's On Freedom, they know as little as their students do. And if you don't know more than your students do, you should get out of the business. People need to read. I'm sorry, but I've been doing this for too long. Freedom involves possible futures, unpredictable to aspiring tyrants and uncaring machines. And any plausible future must be connected to a remembered or historical past. Knowledge of the past is therefore a reservoir of power and self-liberation. Many things are possible, but not everything is possible. When we know nothing about the past, we think anything is possible, but are quickly disillusioned. Is that a good statement?
That is.
I tell you, the stuff freedom involves possible futures, unpredictable to aspiring tyrants and uncaring machines. And any plausible future must be connected to a remembered or historical past. Knowledge of the past is therefore a reservoir. I could repeat that over and over and over, but there's a shorter way of saying it. Those who forget the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. And that's exactly what we're doing in this country right now. And I recognize it because I was there from 1933 until 1945. And you can tell me I'm a stupid, crazy old woman. I ain't stupid. I am crazy. I am old. And I'm a woman. And you know where the word woman came from?
Where?
You know why they came up with woman? Because I have a womb. Or used to. I still have one. I don't use it anymore. But I'm a womb, so I'm a woman. I have a womb, so I'm a woman.
Mm.
I didn't realize that. Some young melanaceous woman called me and told me that several months ago. And I thought, my God, why didn't I know that? I thought that they made the word woman by adding woe to man, because women do add woe to men. And I realized that. But somebody told, I thought that I couldn't imagine why the male, female. And then after I took chemistry, I realized that Fe is the chemical symbol for iron. So you add Fe, the chemical symbol for iron, to the word for male, and you get female. And if you think I'm crazy about that, you go to the nearest rest home and count the number of little old ladies there are there, and then count the number of men. There'll probably be 30 little old women and 5 little happy little men, because every woman in the room there thinks he's the greatest thing that ever lived on this earth. I tell you, I've watched it, I've lived it. I don't want my daughters, my granddaughters, my great-granddaughters to live that. And I've got all 3.
Let me ask you a question that
You want an answer?
that listeners that listeners can use your answer to really make a difference right now. And that is, what would you say is one of the most important things people can do right now to fight racism in their own communities?
Study. Read. Get these books and go to my website and look at the list of books about racism, because racism is the #1 mental health problem among children in the United States of America. The psychologists figured that out in, I think, like 1958 or 59, maybe earlier. Racism was identified as one of the major mental health problems in the and killed children in the United States of America. So what you have to do is educate yourself so that you can teach your children the truth, instead of allowing them to live with that lie that was started in the late 1400s. Tell your children the truth and refuse to tolerate racist statements being made in your presence and being made in your home by people who don't belong in your home, or who do belong in your home but would use racist statements. My father wouldn't put up with racist statements in his home after he saw the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And after that, you didn't tell a black joke in my father's home after that. And if you started to tell one, and the kids would come, we were old, we were adults, and we should have known better. But my brother would start to tell a racist joke, and my father said, "You're going to tell that here?" You know how Jane feels about that. I remember when my brother-in-law started to tell a racist joke, and I stopped him. I said, "You aren't going to tell that in my presence, are you?" And he went out on the porch. "I don't have to put up with this." And he went out on the porch. I thought, he thinks he can tell it out there. I own the building he was telling it in. So I walked out and stood beside him. I said, "You aren't going to tell that on my porch, are you?" "I don't have to put up with this." And he left. And I thought, didn't get the story told. I lost a brother-in-law. Did I care? Not really, because there are people around whom I don't have to be. And if I allowed that in my presence, then I am no better than he is. And if his friendship was that important to me, that's too important. No, I've lost a lot of friends because I would say, you use the N-word around me again, and you'll wish you hadn't, because I will call you on it every time you do it. Well, you never stop, do you? I said, no. You see, it isn't that I never stop. It's that you never stop until somebody says to you, it's time to stop. There are words that we need to take out of our vocabulary, and one of them is biracial. Somebody who works in this area sent me an email, and I've had this happen 3 times in the last couple of weeks, and said there was a large biracial, my marriage is a biracial marriage. So I wrote, which other planet did one of you come from? Because if you are in a biracial marriage, one of you must have come from another planet, since every person on the face of the earth is a member of the same race. So I got a letter back from that one saying, "I'm sorry, I won't use that word again." I thought, yeah, you won't use it writing to me. And you watch, oh, Lord, when what's his name, was killed, George Floyd was killed, the people telling the news said, people of all races are out there in the street. I thought, you simple sons, all races? There's only one race out there in the street. People of all shades of brown are out there in the street, but every one of those people is a member of my race, and every one of those people is one of my 30th to 50th cousin. And if I were out there with those 30th to 50th cousins, I would see to it that those people who are using words like all races would be stopped immediately, because we have used racism to separate people for the last about 400 years. That's long enough. We gave up many of the things that they did 400 years ago. If we're going to use the language and the words of the 1400s and 1500s, then all these men who are using those words need to come to work dressed as they did in those days, with pointy-toed shoes with little flowers on the top, with knee breeches and powdered wigs. And all the women who get out of the house, and they won't be allowed to get out of the house because they'll be too busy having children and staying in the house doing housework. But if they come out of the house, they'll have to wear a corset that makes their waist no more than 18 inches around, because we're going to dress the way they did in the early 1500s. And if you want to send me a message, you'll have to use smoke signals, because we are going to give up television, radio, telephone, all these wonderful things that we have for communication. And nobody will ever be in a car race, a modern car race again, as long as they live, because they didn't have cars. You'll be walking to work, or you'll be riding your horse. Now, I think people in this century are going to have difficulty being transported using the same kind of transportation and communication that they did in the 1400s and 1500s. Would you agree with that?
I would.
Well, you see, Trump is going to take us back there. He's going to do away with the postal department. So pretty soon you'd better learn how to read smoke signals and how to send them, because you aren't going to have a postal department. This whole thing is like, let's go back to when men were men and women knew their place. Women have learned what their place really is. And 3 things they have to know, you have to remember. If nobody remembers anything of what I've said before, this they have to remember. These are facts. Number 1, without what we call blacks, there would be no what we call whites. Period. Every one of us, if we trace our DNA back far enough, would find that some of our DNA came from a country on the continent of Africa. And those people were what we call black because we were too stupid to know any better. Without those blacks, there would be no whites. Without women, there would be no men. The first human being on earth was undoubtedly a woman, because if it hadn't been, there wouldn't have been any men. You can put 2 female mammal eggs together in a petri dish, break down the cell wall, combine the eggs, combine that thing, and come up with another female mammal. If you put a bunch of sperm cells together in a petri dish, all you get are mixed up sperm. You will not get another mammal of any kind. So without women, there would be no men. And here's the one that really drives people crazy. Without Jews, there would be no Christians. Period. So if we could do away with racism, sexism, ethnocentrism, anti-Semitism, if we could do away with those 3 isms, think of the amount of time we'd have to spend on all the other stupid isms, like ageism and weightism and heightism, all the rest of that nonsense. We could do with all those if we had time, because we weren't dealing with racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism. Does that make sense to you?
Makes perfect sense.
Well, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but I said that to a group of educated educators. And this woman said, "Oh, that's so true." And somebody else says, "I never thought of it." And these are people with more degrees than you could count. And I'm sitting there thinking, I thought, my God, people, this is not rocket science. This is what we call common sense. Think about it.
It's not so common.
We don't. It's not too common. We don't. There's a book that I'm reading right now. I just got it yesterday. It's called White Women. It's in the other room because I've got to finish it today. It's just full of good information about what people who care about this situation can do to make the changes. And one of the things you have to do is give up being nice. And when I read that sentence, I thought, thank you, God. I'm accused of not being nice. Oh, in the last 55 years, probably, 5,500, more than that, a lot of times. But it's just, nice doesn't work. Sometimes what you have to be is what somebody else is going to call nasty, because you have to refuse to accept this ridiculous nonsense. And once you read this, you can never accept it again, because you keep remembering what Timothy Snyder said, and you think, oh, why didn't I say that? If I wish I had said what this woman, Anthea Butler, and Timothy Snyder, and Jason Stanley have said. I wish I'd known that. I wish I'd written that book, but I didn't know then what I know now. But they know it a whole lot younger than I learned it. So that's real progress as far as I'm concerned. If I had to wait until I was 35 to learn that stuff, and then have to wait until I was 91 to dare to say it, these people are younger than that, some of them. So they are, and if kids are allowed to learn from this, they don't have, these are twin girls. They have the same mother and father. So you see, if kids could learn this, if the teachers could expose them to this in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classroom, they wouldn't have to wait until they were as old as these people, or as old as I am, to know the truth. I never thought of that before. Can you imagine what this country would be like and what this world would be like if we dared to raise kids who know the truth from birth instead of having to learn it after they reach the age when they can make their own living? Think of the times we've wasted. Yeah, think of the times we've wasted that we could have taught them here, and then they could have built on that until they get to be the age of Timothy Snyder, and they will already have known a whole lot more than he says in this book because they've read his book.
We'd be in a different world, different reality.
It would be a reality. Instead of living a mythology. We're living with the myth. And if you haven't read the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman, get it and read it. And if you don't want to read the whole thing, read the first chapter and the last page of the last chapter. It is just mind-blowing when you realize what people knew and tried to keep others from knowing. And that's a major effort in the United States of America, and in most pale, stale countries. The major effort is to perpetuate the thing that makes us the most money, and that's racism. And if you haven't read the book The System by Robert Reich, you better get it and read it, because it's all about the businessmen's round table. It is just full of facts about how we're being used, and how money is directing everything we do in this country, and how determined they are to perpetuate this mess. If you haven't read Robert Reich's book, The System, get it and read it. You read that, and this, and this, and this, and then you'll be as objectionable as I am. You too will have no friends, and your relatives will all stay away from you as fast as, get away from you as fast as they can.
Let me ask you this. In your 91 years of existence, and with all that you know now, what is it that you would want to be known for, and what do you want people to know most?
I want people to know that education, true education, when you lead people out of ignorance, is the answer, the solution to the problems that we have in this country and throughout the world. And if I am known as anything, I want to be known as an educator who is willing to take the slings and arrows of unpleasant misfortune in order to create a situation in which people are afraid to make a racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric statement in my presence. And I want enough people who also refuse to put up with that kind of behavior in their presence. I want them to become the majority instead of the minority. Right now, they're in the minority, and their numbers are getting smaller instead of larger. Because right now, we're in a society where you are expected, is not just expected, but is approved if you can act like a racist, sexist, homophobic, ethnocentric fool. You, too, can become a member of the president's cabinet. Now, think about that. Think about that. And if you are a racist from another country who has lied to get into this country but have billions of dollars, you can upset the government of the United States. You can clean it up so that you take out all the fraud and all the people who are not doing things right. You can dump the Department of Education. You can agree to do away with Social Security. You can agree to do away with things that it has taken us 250 years to put together, and those things were being good for all of us. But if you have enough money, you can destroy the whole thing in about 2 weeks. 2 months. It has taken them 2 months. Think about that. I want people to refuse to be led by somebody who isn't fit to lead, who has neither the education, nor the morals, nor the ethics, nor the principles to lead a country in the right way. I want people to be aware of that. I want people to see, when they see that, I want them to recognize what's happening and to stand up and stand out and say, no, no, as my dad would say, by the gods of war, you're not going to do that where I am. I want people who are willing, and not only willing, but eager to put a stop to the kind of thing that is done by those who have no morals and no ethics and no real feeling for human beings.
Let me ask you another question.
I don't want much.
Let me ask you this.
What?
If you could go back and talk to that woman in 1968, the one who had no idea how much her life was about to change, what would you say to her?
I'd say, you have no idea. My husband said to me, you have no idea what you have done or what it's going to cost you. And before you do this, you'd better decide what you're willing to give up. I had no idea that I would have to give up my 5 siblings and my mother because of that exercise. I had no idea that my children would be viciously mistreated by their educators in the school in which my great-grandfather had helped to build in that community. I had no idea that would happen. If I had known that would happen, that wouldn't have kept me from doing the exercise, but I would have warned my kids. I didn't warn my kids, and that's the mistake I made. I didn't sit down with them the night before I did it and say, here's what I'm going to do tomorrow, kids. You need to know this, and when ugly things happen to you because of it, you need to realize that it isn't because of the exercise. It's because of those who are frightened by the truth that we learn from the exercise. Now, my son learned that the hard way. So he wouldn't come back to Riceville for any reason, even when his grandfather died. He wouldn't go to the funeral because he didn't want to be around those people. And he only came back to Riceville once in a while because of what had happened to him there. He didn't want to be around those people, and I understand that. But if I had warned them first, then they wouldn't have taken on themselves the responsibility for their mother being an N-word lover. They would have realized that it was the people who were the haters, the N-word haters, who were the problem. Not those of us who are the N-word lovers. The haters are the problem. They didn't realize that. And I didn't realize that my kids would become the N-word in the community in which my great-grandfather was one of the first settlers. And not because there was something wrong with the lesson or with my kids, but there was something wrong with the community that will do that. And there's something wrong with educators that will do that. After I had done the exercise, newspaper people came to interview me, the superintendent, Mr. J. And one of them said to her, the principal, to the superintendent, why didn't you fire her? He said, I could have fired her, but I knew she was doing the right thing. I couldn't fire her when she was doing the right thing. And that's what the man had to put in the paper. Well, that cost Mr. J a whole lot because he said something that he wasn't allowed to say. People didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear that what I had done was the right thing. He said, how could I fire her for doing the right thing? I couldn't have fired her. So you see, I had superintendents and principals who knew that I was doing the right thing, but they knew that they were going to get the flack from it. Well, it took me about 2 years to realize that administrators are flack catchers. And that's what they had to do, was take the flack. But my students, and I would have been fired, and I know that, had I not taken a course in Orton Slingerland phonics from a woman named Paula Rome in Rochester, Minnesota. I had a dyslexic child in my classroom, didn't realize what dyslexia was. His mother stopped me when I was walking home one day and said, Jane, I need to talk to you. So I went in, and she said, no, you're going to have my son. He is dyslexic. Don't try to teach him to read because you can't do it. You don't know how. But I'm taking a course in Rochester, Minnesota, and I'm taking my son to Rochester twice a week to learn how to read. So you don't have to teach him how to read. Read the science and social studies and all the math problems to him, and he'll be taught to read by Mrs. Rome in Rochester, Minnesota. I said, fine. So Jeff came in. I tell you, Jeff, tall, handsome, blonde, scared to death. Because he was afraid that what had happened to him in first and second grade was going to happen to him in third grade. He'd been hit, he'd been slapped, he'd been treated viciously because he couldn't read. So his mother took him to Rochester, Minnesota to the remedial reading course taught by Paula Rome, and she taught him how to read. And I watched that kid go from a child who was covered with psoriasis. When he walked across the room, white fell off him. It was like a snowstorm when he walked across the road. He was covered with psoriasis. By the end of the year, he was reading at the upper third grade level, and he had one little spot of psoriasis in the crook of his elbow. All the rest of it was gone because his fear was gone. His inability was gone. He was able to do what the other third graders could do because Paula Rome took him in hand and taught him how to read. I watched that happen, and I thought, okay, Jane, you better spend the money and the time and take the course. So I called Mrs. Rome and asked if I could take the course, and she told me the 3 weeks it was going to be run. So I went to drove to Rochester, Minnesota every day for 3 weeks in the summer and took a course in Orton Slingerland phonics. And after that, every child who came through my classroom learned how to read because I know how to teach a dyslexic child. It's like a miracle. The third group, the second group, the third group, the film was made of it. The film, The Eye of the Storm. Have you seen The Eye of the Storm? If you haven't, you should take a look at it because my principal gave me my class roll that year before school started. We're in the hall, and I love that principal. He's a lovely man. He handed me that class roll. He said, Miss Elliott, these kids are never going to learn how to read. Pass them on and get them out of here. They're never going to amount to anything anyway. The other teachers haven't been able to teach them how to read, and neither will you. And I thought some really ugly things about that man, whom I had admired greatly up till that point. And I thought, you're going to find out you're wrong. So I went to the office and I looked at the cumulative files. Every one of those kids who wasn't supposed to learn how to read had low reading scores, low reading and spelling scores, and high math scores. And I thought, if those kids can do math, they have the IQ. But if they can't read, they have a special reading difference. It isn't reading disability, it's a reading difference. And I know how to teach to it. And I started to laugh. And I walked down the hall laughing. And the teachers looked at me like, she really is crazy. I thought, you don't know how crazy I am, you silly witches. Those 16 kids came into my room in the fall. They came in almost, they didn't walk in, they just snuck in like frightened little fawns. And they looked around like, this is the bad place. And I said, sit down, kids. Now, you people are afraid of me, aren't you? Well, yeah, why? Well, everybody says and they said the B word. I said, I know they do, and you need to know that you aren't going to see that side of me. I'm not going to be a witch here, but what you're going to do is learn to read. And they looked at me like, huh? I said, every one of you is going to leave here reading at or above the 4th grade level. Then they looked at each other like, see, she really is crazy. And I thought, it's not. I can do this. I'm good. It was just delightful. So the first thing I did was, we taught them the listening skills. And I said, now, you 7 come back to the reading table with me. I'm going to teach you how to read. The rest of you do this busy work. So the rest of them did busy work. I think it was 5. Came back to the reading table, and I taught them the short sound of A and 11 or 12, what's the word I want? Think of the word I want. Vowels, consonants. If you learn one consonant and 5 or 6 or 8 or 10, one vowel and 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 consonants, you can spell 100 words. If you learn A and B and T and N, you can spell more words than you've ever been able to spell in your life. It's just absolutely remarkable. And I sat those kids at that table, and I'd read a word, I'd tell them to spell a word, and then they'd have to sound it. We use the 4S system: say it, sound it, spell it, and say it. And that's what they did. And at the end of that period, they could read and spell 50 words that they had never been able to read and spell before. Now, It's not because I'm a genius, and it's not because I'm brilliant, and it's not because I have something new. I was teaching phonics. And some kids, 20 to 30% of the population of this country, need to be taught phonetically, because our words are phonetically right. It's just remarkable. Those kids were like, wow, that's it. I told you, I'm going to teach you how to read. Now, tomorrow, we're going to learn another vowel and some more consonants. We're going to learn the short sounds first and the consonants, and then we're going to learn the long vowels and how to spell them. When you leave this classroom, you'll be reading at or above the 1st grade level. And they just walked through that year like, what could then we do? And they learned to spell and they learned to read, and it was remarkable. One of those kids who was called a failure became a lawyer. So, see, I didn't succeed with all of them. He's just a damn lawyer. But we did pretty well. One of them, I watched those. One of them became a junior and senior high school teacher. Junior and senior high school teacher. And he quit teaching 3 or 4 years ago because he could make more money doing something else. And those 10 of those 16 came back to Riceville last August and called me and said, we want to have a class reunion with just our room tenors. I said, that's a good idea. Will you come over? I said, yeah, but I won't come over on Saturday because that's the big celebration day. And those people in Riceville don't want me there on their celebration day. And of course, these kids laughed because they knew what I was saying. They said, that's all right. We'll do it on Sunday. We're going to talk to the superintendent and see if we can use a room in the high school, in the Riceville school on Sunday. I said, fine, I'll be there. So I went, and the film crew came along because I told this guy, we're going to do this. And he said, we want to film them. So I went and met these 10 kids, over 60 years old. And it was like, my God, you're all my little children. They were just absolutely fantastic. And by the time we were about ready, and we'd been there, and I was ready to leave. And one of them, the teacher, who used to be the one who had gone from teaching into another form of work, sitting there said, Mrs. Elliott, you know what you did to us? I said, what did I do? He said, you taught us the truth. You just taught us the truth. Now, I get goosebumps when I remember how that felt, because that's what I did. I taught them the truth. I taught them that they could learn, that they had to be taught a special way. They could succeed. They didn't have to succeed just because some teachers had failed in what they were being paid to do. The kids didn't fail. The system failed the kids. And that's what happens with young males who are melanaceous and melanotic in this country all day, every day. We force them to live down to our expectations of them. And when they exceed our expectations, we call them something else. We find a way to keep them in their place. Because if those young melanaceous and melanotic, whom we call black males, succeed, we people that call ourselves white have failed because we didn't keep them down where they were supposed to be. And if you tell a person that they are less than long enough, they'll live down to your expectations of them. Unless they have parents who say to them when they come home at night, don't believe everything that white teacher says. read the book, do the work, do the very best you can, and we're going to prove that that teacher is wrong. And that is the worst thing that can happen to a pale, stale male in the schools in the United States of America, to have a shade of brown young man who refuses to live down to that pale, stale male's expectations of him. We'll do whatever we can to see to it that he doesn't succeed. We'll drive him out of school if we have to. And then that kid will go out on the street and make more money than that teacher will ever make. They'll make more in a night than that teacher will make in a month. But they'll have to do it in a way that will get them in trouble with the law. And they asked me to speak to a group in a maximum security prison somewhere in Illinois several years ago. And I went and spoke to that group, and we have it on film someplace. And these men, when I was done speaking, they lined up, and all they wanted, one of them said, all I want to do is just touch her. And I knew he didn't mean that because I was white, it's because I was female. I knew what he was talking about. But they lined up just to stand, just to shake my hand as they went out of that room, and most of them were melanaceous and melanotic men who hadn't succeeded in schools because teachers forced them to live down to the teacher's expectations of them. I'll never forget the man. This is in one of those films. A man who's melanotic in a prison in upstate New York, who on film says, after watching the film The Eye of the Storm, if they'd been doing that when I was in school, I wouldn't be where I am today. And he's absolutely right. If we had been teaching the truth when he was in school, if we had been teaching that we're all members of the same race, we all have the right to be treated fairly, and we all are members of the same color group, but in different shades. If we had been doing that, instead of what we have been and are still doing, he wouldn't be where he is today, and most of the young melanaceous and melanotic men who are in prison wouldn't be where they are today because they would have been treated fairly. But first we have to educate the educators, and then you have to educate the people who educate the educators. And that means you've got to go into colleges and universities and say, now these are the things you're not going to tell these students in the future. And the governor of Florida is doing exactly that. And he's saying we're not going to teach the truth about slavery to students in Florida because it'll make our white kids feel guilty. Do you see a circular thing here? This goes round and round and round. Find the wheel, and it goes round, 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 and it keeps on going because nobody stops it and says, in this generation, we're going to stop this frickin' wheel. We're going to tell these kids the truth, and we're going to raise a different kind of citizens of the United States of America.
Do you think at any point in your lifetime or in the future you'll see that?
Depends on how long I live. And if I live as long as people want me to, I would have died yesterday. So I think we've got to get past the next 3 years. The next 3.5 years in this country are going to be the most dangerous we've ever experienced. And I mean that sincerely. This is so much like the Hitler years that we've got to get through this without having the person who wrote Contract 2025, Project 2025. We've got to guarantee that what he wrote, what he predicted would happen, is not allowed to happen. And our present president and his faculty members, the members of his group, have read Project 2025, which tells you that this is the way this society should run. And it's absolutely in opposition to anything I've ever believed in or anything our founding fathers believed in. So we've got to make sure that people realize that Project 2025 is not what you want for a democracy. It's what you would like for an autocracy or something like what Hitler wanted. It's a dictatorship. If that's what you want, if you want a dictatorship, follow Project 2025. If you don't want that, sustain this democracy by every person in this democracy who could, whether or not you can read or write, if you can think, and you know that, as my father would say, you know the difference between right and wrong, now do the right. God damn it. He used to say that to us regularly. And so you did the right thing, because if you didn't, it was going to be extremely unpleasant for you. But the problem here is that right now you are being encouraged to do what you know is the wrong thing. And you will be rewarded for that instead of being rewarded for doing the right thing. We know the difference between right and wrong. We've had that for 250 years this year. 250 years of a system that worked. Didn't work perfectly, but it worked better than any other system has. And we have 42% of the Republican Party who are ready to give that up. I'm not ready to give that up. And neither are my two daughters or my son. They aren't as vocal about it as I am. But they've run their mouths enough so that nobody makes racist statements in their presence. That's a step in the right direction. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually they'll be on sexism. Then they'll get a little older and they'll be hit ageism. And then they'll get smart enough to hit anti-Semitism. But you can only deal with one at a time. And my kids have had to deal with this kind of thing for the oldest one is 69 years old. And she's dealt with this problem for 59 years of it because of her mother. And your mother has dealt with it for longer than I have. And your grandmother dealt with it. Now, in 250 years, we should have learned to behave in such a way in this country that nobody has to deal with racism. We've been to the moon. Zuckerberg and company have been to the moon. And we're still dealing with racism on planet Earth. It's a choice we make. Racism is an extremely economic. It's a money-making endeavor. Racism is a money-making endeavor. As long as we have it, people in the business roundtable will make a lot of money. Mm. When we give it up, then we're going to have to stop acting like a democracy instead of what we're doing right now. Right now, I'm really concerned about this country losing. I'm really concerned about us losing our democracy. Because if you haven't read Project 2025, you ought to get a look at it. It's out there, 180 pages or something. Read it, and that is the manual which Donald Trump is using to run this country. It's pure, unadulterated racism, sexism, homophobia, and full of lies.
Mm. Well, we've talked about a lot, and
you haven't talked much about anything. I'm sorry. You listen to me talk about a lot, and you can check and see whether I'm right about Project 2025, and you can check all these books and see if I'm right about that. And then just to make sure that you've checked it all, first, before you do all that, first read this, because it's a short and simple description of these twin sisters make us rethink everything we know about race. That's exactly what this book does, this magazine does. It makes us rethink everything we think we know about race. It's important that we learn that. Okay, what's your final statement?
All right, so last question.
Okay. You just keep asking, don't you? Go ahead.
You've said before, prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance, and that the only way to break that commitment is to be willing to see the truth. If you could use your platform to encourage anyone who might be struggling, especially those who are struggling to make sense of racism, division, and injustice that they see in the world, what would you say?
I'd say give up race. It's a myth. It was made up in the 1400s. It was the word race to mean a separate group of people came out of France in 1580. There's only one race of people, and that's the human race. Stop talking about race because there's only one. Start talking about human beings. Stop using the word race. It is used to terrify people. It's used to separate us. It's called divide and conquer. And as long as we deal with race as if that were the problem, it isn't. Racism isn't the problem. Self-imposed ignorance is the problem. Get over your ignorance. Get over your ignorance and do what this one said. Imagine walking in another person's shoes for a day. Just imagine that. And all of you. Oh, this isn't the one. That's a good book, but that's not the one. All of you, get the book White Women and read it. White women, get the book and read White Women. It will change the way you react to your children, to your husband, to your fathers, to your brothers, to your probably boss, to your employees. Get the book White Women. Educate yourselves. Do not go plodding along believing whatever the leader tells you, because this leader has been found guilty of 34 what?
Felonies.
Felonies. Found guilty of 34 felonies. But he's got enough money to keep him out of jail. Realize what it is that you're working against. Stand up and be counted. Refuse to go along to get along, because that's the sure way for this country to no longer be a democracy. And do not believe any silly person of any gender who says we need to get rid of democracy. That's our problem. We need to stop being democratic, because they think that's a political party instead of a way of life. It's time for us to defend this 250-year-old democracy. Does that answer your question?
It sure did. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for choosing to make a difference instead of $1 when your father told you that so long ago.
Best thing he ever said to us. And you need to realize that the first people look like you. They didn't look like me. The only reason there's somebody who looks like me is because of somebody who looked like you. You have to realize that it all began with people who look like you. You started it all. You built the bridges, you built the ships, you fought the wars, you did the things that had to be done, you produced the children, you raised the crops, my God, you did the things that had to be done. And in the first place, you were enslaved because of people who didn't realize that they came from the same place that you did. And so you have been forced to allow yourself to think less of people who look like you than you think of people who look like me. And there are only people who look like me because there were people who look like you. We have to get that into people's heads. Without you, people look like you, there would be no people who look like me. Period. Oh, well, shut up, Jane. I can hear my husband saying, shut up, Jane. You're going off. All right, Gerald, I'm going to shut up.
I would never tell you that.
Oh, but he would. He tried every once in a while. And then I started making money because I was working with corporations. And he'd say, by God, Jane, I believe you're right. And I'd think, honey, I love you to death, but you really shouldn't have said that. And I did love him to death. Okay.
If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
Jane at JaneElliott.com. If you're going to send me hate mail, send it to Jane at JaneElliott.com. If you're going to send me anything else, send that to Jane at JaneElliott.com, and I'll put it in the other address. But I don't have to. If I used to get hate mail, and I'd think, well, I know what I'll do. I'll write a book, and I'll put the hate mail on the left-hand side page, on the left page, and then I'll put the mail that agrees with what I do on the right. And then I thought, you dummy. If you do that, you'll be giving attention to those who are talking about you in hateful ways. Why would you do that? So I started just deleting them. So now I'm not going to do that anymore. I have a couple that came in the last couple of weeks, and I think, well, I'll keep that one because people don't believe how ignorant these folks are. Well, I'll keep that one. I delete them. I delete them now. I answer them, and then I delete them. But they never answer my answer.
Sure.
Which says they spelled everything they could the first time. It probably took them a couple of weeks to get all those words, and they still didn't get them spelled right. So you can't expect too much of these folks that are haters. They've got so much time. They spend so much time discovering why they hate, but not knowing how to spell the name of the person that they hate, that they misspell my last name, and that they all know how to spell Jane. Dick and Jane, yeah, yeah. They all know how to spell Jane, but they have trouble with Elliot. So I just look at them and think, well, this one must be dyslexic. Thomas Edison was dyslexic, but he was smarter than this. So you just read this stuff and you think, how long have you been making a living and you got through school and you never learned to spell? I mean, come on, fellas. If you can't spell it, don't yell it. That's simple. If you can't spell it, don't yell it, because somebody's going to ask you, how do you spell that word? And they're going to fall apart, because one of the things we do in this country is ignore the dyslexic male, and 4 out of 5 dyslexics are males. Now, I didn't say 4 out of 5 males are dyslexic. I said 4 out of 5 dyslexic. If you have 5 dyslexic students in your room, 4 of them will be male. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. All right.
You're
Well,
welcome. Well, thank you for listening, and do what you have to with this, but please do it so I don't look totally stupid.
Well, there's nothing that I could do that would make you look stupid. I'm just honored to have the opportunity to have you share space with me, tell your story, and to do the things that you're doing.
We shared quite a bit of space, didn't we? 2.5 hours.
We did, and it was wonderful.
Well, I don't know if it's wonderful, but there are some things that people have to know. People will live down to our expectations of them. And that's exactly why we have prisons in this country, is because we create a group of people who will live down to our expectations of them so that we can put them in prison, and we can send our products to be made in those prisons. We can send the raw materials to be made in those prisons for people who are working for less than 50 cents an hour. And then the money that they earn doing that work goes to the victim of their crime.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you study the prison system, all of a sudden you realize what keeps racism alive. Why would you give up something that is that profitable?
Right.
And what racism is, it's a profitable enterprise. And as long as the businessmen's roundtable is running the show, that's how long it will be profitable, and that's how long we'll have racism. And you need to realize when people say to you, it isn't in the Bible, you need to say, wait a minute, fool. The Bible was written by men, except for one book of the Bible. It was all written by men. So it is written from the male point of view. History was written by men because women weren't allowed to write history books. So the history books are written in a way that recognizes what men did, not what women did. We have to start teaching that women did some wonderful things, but men took the credit because women weren't supposed to know anything. Try to raise a family without a woman. Try to have a family without a woman. Okay, we're going to say goodbye now for the last time. Goodbye. I've gone on too much. All right. Well, use what you can.
All right, Jane. Well, Cousin Jane, I want to again say thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this with me. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do it.
Well, thank you for being who you are and what you do. And thank you for being willing to listen to me for 2.5 hours. And thank you for daring to have me on for any length of time whatsoever, because this is not going to make you popular with people of any shade of brown. Because we are convinced that we are white and black and red and yellow, and there are no people who are shades of brown. Until we get the idea of shades of brown into people's heads, we're in trouble. Now, a man named Todd Mealy has written a book called Shades of Brown, and it's all about me. So go to your bookstore and see if you can find a copy of Shades of Brown by Todd Mealy. All right, and Todd Mealy will be delighted, okay? All right, goodbye now.